citizen, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voice.
Hello and welcome to the People Powered Planet podcast. Each week we focus on various solution areas. While there's a world of problems out there, folks, the key to overcoming our depression and just getting overwhelmed by them is to really focus on how we can actually make a difference. And today we're very pleased to have a very special guest who has been active as an educator on the nuclear war issue. She volunteered at the United Nations at the early stages of the creation of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and will be telling us a little bit about her journey with that treaty and how we can actually utilize that, what's happening around the world, and how it can be utilized to really give us, we the people, the power to begin to save our world. Now, right now, the world stands, according to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, at 100 seconds from a midnight of unparalleled catastrophe. We see a heating up of Cold War with China and Russia. We see even the China fearing that the revelations of the COVID connection to the Wuhan lab could exacerbate a Cold War. And we see on both sides people wanting to point blame and actually increase the risk rather than step back from the risk of nuclear war. So this is a pivotal time, folks, for us to be talking to our guest, a guest who can help us to really come together and make a difference to prevent nuclear war and the other catastrophes that are facing humanity. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists had a very interesting panel this morning on this question of the Wuhan lab leak related to COVID and their revelations that have helped spark the Biden probe. But at the same time, we see the China state media fearing that could lead to nuclear war, that they've got to build up their weapons to deter the US. So we see a frightening situation all around the world. And we also, I think today, are going to talk about the crux of how we can get a handle on turning that around. So first, I'd love to welcome Joanne Dufour. And Joanne has a blog, the Disarming Our Planet blog. So welcome, Joanne. And why don't we just start in by your telling us a little bit more about how you first started volunteering at the UN and got connected to this treaty that you say is so crucial for our planet.
Well, thank you, Arthur, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this excellent program. I had been connected over the course of my teaching career. I was a social studies teacher, and I was connected with the Unitarian office at the United Nations. They were an NGO, and they were a significant NGO, especially when it came to the issue of nuclear weapons. And I had always dreamed of volunteering, but once my life became my own and my husband had died and I was wondering what to do, I thought, well, gee, I think I would like to volunteer. I started off the volunteering, not physically, but by helping with one of their annual conferences. And the annual conference took place in 2017. And the whole theme was disarmament. And that wasn't current in my agenda, not in those years. But the panel that it was my job to try to organize and pull together, the panel was all about what was going on in the issue of nuclear weapons, and what was going on was this creation of this treaty. And one of the panelists, Ray Atchison with WILF, she was just stunning, and she kind of outdid all the other panelists, and you walked away saying, my gosh, this is important. So when I decided to volunteer the following January at the office, and I asked what could I do to help, they said, well, you got enthused about the panel. Why don't you do something with disarmament? And that became the beginning of the blog. And I got connected with extremely expert people, and I was a total novice. That's why I don't consider myself very experienced at all. Not when you meet the ancient people have been doing this for years.
As an observer, when you heard this woman who had such an impact on you, what was it about her message about the treaty that grabbed you and said, "This is something I've got to devote my life's work to"?
First of all, it was her passion, and the fact that she was listening to and responding to what many, many, many governments realized was necessary, and that was the elimination of nuclear weapons. And which governments were these? They weren't any of the countries that had the weapons. This was going on among the countries that didn't have the weapons. And yet we know darn well that once those weapons are used, radiation and nuclear winter doesn't respect borders. It affects everyone in the world. And so the detonation of, they used to say the detonation of if two Trident subs decided to just discharge what they had on the subs, it would destroy the whole planet. Well, that kind of information is very, very powerful. So when you hear people standing up and opposing something and then having a treaty actually be written and then come into force because enough countries ratified it, my gosh, that was exciting. You really had a voice of resistance that was substantial. And the substantial part was amazing. And that story was amazing.
Now, just for people who don't know, please catch us up a little bit on the numbers of people who have both signed the treaty and have ratified it, and what it means to have moved that into international law.
Okay, well, let me just tell you briefly the story. The story started in 2010 when the NPT had its annual conference. And at that time, the NPT is the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that was always considered to be the highlight and the success story, to not have ever had in war a nuclear weapon go off since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But there was an article in the NPT that called on the issue of the nuclear weapons working for nuclear disarmament. And the countries that were, they had 191 countries well, back then it was 190, but they had signed on to this treaty. And they looked at this Article 6 that said, hey, you guys are supposed to disarm. You're not disarming. You've been expanding your nuclear weapons over and again. So they got tired of it and discouraged. And what happened is an NGO called the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons decided that this was their time. They rallied the 44 countries that had spoken out at that meeting, and they decided to meet with them. And they scheduled these meetings, invited the nuclear powers to join them. Nuclear powers were not at all interested in having any talk of what to do with nuclear weapons, less, especially dismantling them in any way, shape, or form. But they had a series of meetings. They had the head of the Red Cross come to speak, and he said, we were there at the beginning, 3 weeks after Hiroshima. We had someone there and explained to us the horror, the absolute incredible horror of what that detonation meant. And the stories of the dripping bodies and the eyeballs that were rolling out of one's head because of the heat and the burning and all the gruesomeness that the rest of the world never knew about. They sort of learned about it with John Hersey's book, but they really didn't know about it. And so, and he said, ever since that time, the Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross, has definitely stood against nuclear weapons. So he convinced the countries that started to attend these meetings that ICAN was organizing. The Pope came and with a moral message, just how dare the nuclear powers bully the rest of the world. This is the most immoral thing that could possibly happen. And he consistently stood on that position. Of course, the Secretary General was totally in agreement. So what happened with the 44 countries, it grew to 125 countries that were showing up to these meetings. And they began to investigate the treaties that were already in existence. And there was no treaty against nuclear weapons. There were treaties to outlaw chemical weapons and cluster munitions and landmines, but no treaty, and biological weapons, but no treaty against nuclear weapons. So that's what ICANN pursued. And at the time, after 3 years of having meeting and such speakers, they actually decided to write this treaty. And when they wrote the treaty, ICANN was behind it. And they had 122 countries at that time that said, that is a wonderful idea. Go for it.
Right.
And
Now that's the vast majority of countries on the earth, right?
Two-thirds of the countries of the world. Yeah.
Right.
And so when they actually wrote the treaty, they said, okay, then according to protocol, we have to have X number of countries sign on, and then it's going to become international law. Well, the number set was 50. Okay. And this all started in 2017, and magically by 2020, I'm trying to think of the time. Yes, by 2020, they had the 50 countries. That matter of fact, in 2020, on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the 50th country, which was Honduras, ratified the treaty. And then they had to wait 90 days until it came into force. So on January 22nd of this year, they had bells ringing around the world, because ICANN has 600 chapters around the world, and everybody in those chapters knew that they were pushing the treaties. The bells ringing around the world celebrating that nuclear weapons were now illegal. And so that story just absolutely, just watching that all happen and realizing that all these countries were coming on board. And, the ratification process is no small deal. Your country has to agree that when they ratify a treaty, that they accept what they didn't write, because it was written by an international group, right? They have to bring it into their own system and apply it to their own system. Well, those 50 countries, and now it's up to 54 countries, because we have 4 additional ones since it entered into force. What they have to do now is to look, okay, these provisions of the treaty are extremely explicit. And I can go into that either now or whenever,
Right.
but
Well, I think we should, because I think the key part is, because I understand that you're also a trainer for the International Humanitarian law for the Red Cross, and I think the key question is, okay, so here we have this law. How do you enforce it? It's legal, and the U.S. Constitution says that treaties are part of the supreme law of the land, and that they're supposed to be enforced by every court in every jurisdiction. And yet we've seen that often hasn't happened, even though that is directly in our Constitution. How does the fact that this has now become international law actually get enforced, particularly on the countries that have the nuclear weapons? If they can't directly enforce it there, are there other ways that these nations around the world see being able to enforce that?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. The whole thing, first of all, I mentioned the role of the ICRC, and the ICRC, in the Geneva Conventions, outlaws 2 things. They outlaw any
ICRC being the International Committee of the Red Cross.
International Committee of the Red Cross, yeah. And in the Geneva Conventions, in our country, we call it the law of armed conflict. Well, what it actually says is that no military action can deliberately target civilians. Okay. Well, how do you explode a nuclear weapon and avoid killing civilians? You can't, because even if you are targeting an explicit military target, the radiation effect is such, and it spreads at such a disastrous range, that civilians are going to be impacted. If they aren't impacted and incinerated immediately because they're part of ground zero, then they're going to be impacted by the radiation that's going to affect them. So that meant that ever since the Geneva Conventions were in force, and that's from the final draft was in 1949, nuclear weapons have been illegal because they violate the idea of distinction. And that's one of the fundamental principles of IHL. You must distinguish between your combatants and your civilians, and you never target civilians. So that meant that technically it was already illegal before this treaty came into effect. And I don't think most people, even Red Cross volunteers, don't know that. I mean, we're trying to teach that now, of course, to the Red Cross volunteers. Of course, the Americans are really sort of skeptical of even teaching about this treaty because, the United States has taken a very strong stand, as have the other countries that want to keep those weapons and want to play the war games. They all consistently have avoided any saying about the treaty. How do we hold those folks accountable? Well, one of the things that they found out, and they found this out with chemical weapons, because they studied the chemical weapons treaty and they studied the biological weapons treaty and how did it come into force. In the past, there have been treaties that affected countries that didn't sign it. But because the treaty became make those weapons illegal, like chemical weapons, and more countries were ratifying that treaty, that it becomes what they call customary law. And customary law meant, this is now the norm. Enough people agree with this that even if you didn't sign on to the treaty, guess what? The expectation is, and the pressure is on you to conform to it, to adopt, and that actually happened. It even happened with the landmine treaty. Okay.
Right. Courts often enforce a customary international law.
Yeah. And so what the hope is the same thing will happen with nuclear weapons, that they are appealing to the populace around the country to pressure their home countries, their own countries, and get a reversal of their nuclear policy.
Well, that gets to kind of a key issue, which is we mentioned the countries who have not ratified it and who want to keep these weapons. Now, as we move into a new Cold War with the Soviet Union and China, we certainly see these corporate interests salivating. They're talking to their stockholders and so on. This is a great growth industry. We see great prospects ahead. Is it the corporate interests and the lobbyists in those countries that favor nuclear weapons, or is it the people of those countries?
No, the people of those countries do not favor the weapons, and you can see it even in NATO countries. And they point to countries that now have nuclear weapons of the United States, like Germany and Belgium, and the polls in those countries are up to 70, 80%. A new Belgian government has just been elected or recently elected, and the former one wanted to keep the weapons. The newer one is supporting the removal of the weapons. So what they're beginning to see is that this is a people's movement, that the people are understanding, if we agree with the treaty, we're going to get rid of those doggone weapons, whether they're our own weapons or whether they're the weapons that we are storing for one of the nuclear powers. So that's the exciting thing that's going on. And it really is exciting when you start to track it. And I have some information to show you if you want me to show you how they reach the cities. I'm going to try to bring up, here we go. Now, one of the heroines that I wanted to point out, because as a female, I got very proud, not only of Ray Atchison's, she was part of the ICANN network. And so the ICANN network is this network that were the ones, they won the Nobel Prize in 2017 because they led these meetings that I spoke about where they were winning over a bunch of countries that were going to want to eliminate the nuclear weapons. Of course, none of the nuclear powers were in that group. But anyway, here we go. But she's one of the heroines, I think, in this. Now, this actually opened up for signature, and the successful part of that was in 2017. When they opened it up for signature, this is what they were going to sign, okay? Now, bearing in mind that technically the weapons are already illegal, most countries are not recognizing that, even though they have signed on to the Geneva Conventions. But those are all provisions that could be taken to court. They could be taken to the International Criminal Court if any country wanted to do that, or any judge wanted to do that, because it's universal jurisdiction and judges have the power to take even leaders to the International Criminal Court. But this is how much the depth of they almost have outlawed thinking about nuclear weapons, but you can't really enforce that. They are saying that never, under any circumstances, should any country that signs the treaty develop, test, produce, manufacture, otherwise acquire, possess, transfer, deploy, use, threat to use, stockpile nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosives, as if that wasn't enough, nor are the parties to the treaty allowed to assist, finance, encourage, induce others to carry out any of these prohibitive acts. Now, what this really means is they looked at the chemical weapons analysis that they use to destroy nuclear weapons, and they use to destroy the chemical weapons, and they had 90% success in destroying 90% of the chemical weapons in the world. Now, that was an amazing story that, again, most people don't know. And it was because it became customary law, to even the point that the United States agreed to destroy its chemical weapon arsenal. So they're hoping the same thing will happen now. But so let's see what actually has happened here. Now, this is the Article 6 of the treaty. In addition to all the steps in the actual production, delivery, storage, whatever, the weapon piece of it, there says the human piece. And the human piece are, what about victims? What about the people who got affected by the explosions of the treaty? Even the miners who mined the uranium and got affected by having to touch the uranium or being exposed to the uranium, or the atomic soldiers who were asked to do transport of nuclear material to the Marshall Islands, for example, not knowing what they were transporting and how this was going to impact their health. So this is an amazing and important piece. And just to let you know how much money the United States has spent on nuclear weapons alone, this is what ICANN has produced. And I think bar graphs help people understand that China is second now and continues to be the second largest expenditure, but that's a difference of $35.5 billion to $10 billion. So we're spending over 3 times as much and continue to have that. Matter of fact, if you add up all of these figures here, you're going to find out that that these figures are almost, well, they're a little bit more, but we have increased this amount that we spent since 2019. So now if you add it up, the US is outspending the total amount spent on nuclear weapons around the world. Now, these are the countries that have ratified it to date. What's the most interesting part of this is 86 additional countries, and ICANN is very hopeful that they are going to be ratifying it. It's just a question of getting it through their local governments, so that the ideal would be by the end of this year, next year, we'll have about 135 countries that are going to be supporting this treaty. And that is the beauty of it. Now, what the outreach efforts are, now let's see if I'm just going to, before we do the outreach efforts, let me show you this. This is what has happened. They have tried to get cities in the countries of the world to sign on to the treaty. Because if you sign on to something that the city promotes, the city is closer to the people. And, to try to influence, federal or national legislation is very hard. But to get your city government to endorse the treaty and send their message on to their national government, that's a very effective piece. And I've been tracking this because we teach a class. And I've been tracking this from the time, which was early 2019 into the latest time. And you can begin to see these are the number of cities in each of these countries that now have endorsed the treaty. Belgium went up from 32 to 67, and it actually helped turn over a new government that is in support of the treaty. Canada has 14 cities right now, Croatia 2. France went up to 36 cities. Germany has 68 cities that have endorsed this treaty. India has only 1. Italy went up slightly to 37. There are two cities in Japan, amazingly, only Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That government is very, very resistant, and even Japan has been considering getting their own nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, how they can do that, I don't understand. But Luxembourg and Netherlands and Norway. Now, Norway is up to 46 cities. So what the interesting part, I think, is making progress throughout the world. 8,004 mayors in 165 countries. The mayors groups have taken on this as a theme. We're hoping that soon maybe the Rotary Club will take on the support of this treaty, I'm hoping. We have 1,600 parliamentarians. They have their own individual organization. 1,600 of them have signed on the treaties. They have encouraged legislators and individuals. We have that effort going on now in Congress, and there are 10 congresspersons that have signed on. Now the total cities, look at this. When we first were doing this, we started teaching this course in 2020, okay? This nuclear weapons course. I did the count at that time, and it was 295 cities. The last time we finished doing the course was in May, and there were 518 cities. Now, can't you get excited about something like that? Honest to God.
I think it's extremely, extremely exciting because, you know, our founder of this whole thing was Gary Davis, who's the subject of our movie, The World Is My Country. And he was the inspiration for this because, oh yeah, what were you saying on the film?
Yeah. He's marvelous. Yes, that movie is terrific.
Well, and of course, one of the key things that he said, in addition to that, we can't sit around, you know, waiting for, like, you know, the United States and these countries to get rid of their weapons. We the people have to take the action. He said that these national boundaries, when you look at the planet from space, they're not real. I mean, it's not really a border between the countries of Europe or other places. Those were all lines drawn on maps, but what is real and what you can see from space, especially at night, is you see cities all over, and cities deal with real problems and they solve things. And so he started the World Cities movement. He called it mondialization, the French term at the time. But I think it's very exciting because cities are the target. I mean, they are the ones who have to say, no, we are not going to let our city be a target, and we're not going to have any connection to nuclear weapons that could make us an attractive target. So maybe you continue with the slides, but yes, I think it's extremely exciting because we now are beginning to see ways then to get a handle that even though the nuclear nations haven't signed it, they could be, in fact, made to comply with this treaty by both the cities and what you're going to continue to tell us about, divestment and other ways that we can take the money out of nuclear weapons.
Okay, and I'm going to veer off to this because this one really got to me. We have a very active peace movement here in Washington State because we house the Trident subs at Bangor, and that turns out to be the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. It is Russia and U.S. for the numbers of weapons, and then good old Washington State at Bangor. And then it goes on to the other countries. And that is very, very frightening. But what I didn't know about the Physicians for Social Responsibility here in Washington until I went to a program and they introduced us to the Marshallese. Well, so what's happening there? Well, we thought we only bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I had no idea that we were testing weapons, especially on the Marshall Islands, because they were a trust territory and became a trust territory during the course of the war. Actually, the Americans the Marshall Islands had been taken over by Japan, and the Americans captured the islands and were there from 1942. So that by the time the United Nations came around and assigned territories to be trust territories, the Marshall Islands became a trust territory of the United States. The United States used that situation to begin to test 67 bombs on the Marshall Islands. Now, they tried to make sure that they were testing islands that they forced the evacuation of people, but that didn't always happen. Sometimes the winds blew in the wrong, unpredictable directions. And so these Marshall Island people have been suffering with the legacy of nuclear weapons testing. This bomb was called Caso Bravo. The United States wanted to outdo, make bigger, better, bigger, better, bigger, better. This was 1,000 times the intensity of Hiroshima. 1,000 times. Now the Russians were going to upstage us down the road and create a bomb, Tsar Bomba, that was going to be 1,500 times the intensity of Hiroshima. It was so big that they decided they could never use it. They could hardly even, after they detonated it. And of course, the testing is not only done by the United States. All the nuclear powers have tested their weapons. And so in each of those cases, you get indigenous peoples who have been affected. And they have specifically been chosen because they're certainly not in the mainstream of news media. They're not in the mainstream in consciousness of anybody but themselves. And they usually are very powerless in this kind of situation. So, and the part that was very, very sad was to see how the Marshallese were treated. They really were not even considered people. They were considered savages. They were considered totally ignorant and totally, they weren't quite sure they were civilized yet, but they were going to be human beings, and well, they could be good test guinea pigs to see what happens with the effects of these nuclear weapons. And so there would be some monies that were allocated towards investigating the health effects, but it wasn't anywhere near really affecting what they were suffering. And so that whole other piece just kind of blew me away, and my heart really went out to the Marshallese. Some of the issues that they were facing, first of all, there are slides, and actually, you can go on YouTube and you can hear the U.S. Army talking to the Marshallese, totally convincing them that what they were doing by evacuating from their lovely, lovely island of Bikini, which was probably one of the most habitable of all the islands, best soil and nice things that grew. One of the things that the people could do, that they were doing this for the good of mankind. Of course, they never told the people of any of the after effects. And by that time, they knew what after effects were in Hiroshima. And it was certainly possible to find out what the human after effects were, because the Japanese Medical Corps and the Japanese Red Cross could tell you, because they had exposure, and they ran hospitals where these people were showing up. So that information was never shared. And when they were giving up their island and being, in friendly persuasion moved to other islands, even when they were moved to other islands, in some cases, the after effects of the radiation would fall upon those islands and they would be affected. So it was the testing of 67 weapons between 1946 and 64. And we already said that there was no information shared. The decisions made to avoid, sometimes if the winds might change right before they were going to do the test, and the winds might be blowing in the neighborhood of the island to which people got re-evacuated. Well, they went ahead with the test, and sure enough, those people got affected, and they were subjected to white powder that fell down, and not knowing what this powder was all about, and it was some of the radiated particles. Okay, the health effects. Well, the health effects continue to this day, even in the Japanese Red Cross hospitals. They will say they are still treating, now it's 75 years after the detonation, that those hospitals are still treating the effects of radiation that came from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that's very hard to believe, but the Red Cross can document that. And the need to pursue the assistance, when you get to learn more about the Marshallese, they do not want to consider themselves victims. These folks are survivors, but I mean survivors with a capital S. They did not stand by and just accept what happened to them. And they were the ones that went to the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice and tried to get a decision. They're the ones that have pursued again and again and again our government to give us what we deserve. We deserve medical care because we are still suffering after effects. And they constantly, now they're going after the countries and waging, and the companies as well, and they're suing companies that are beginning to respond and getting decisions in their favor. So it's an amazing story when you try to hear what, and that's why we were saying that part of the treaty actually says in that Article 6 of the treaty. Here we go. In Article 6 of the treaty, that's why they're saying, and they read into it, because by that time, Kazakhstan, which was obviously one of the parts of the Soviet Union, they were a testing ground. And so when they became independent from the Soviet Union, they took a strong stand against nuclear weapons. They removed all the nuclear weapons they have. And now some of the best speakers of this is what it was like for us. The voices you've never heard before, you're beginning to hear them. And the Kazakhs are learning. The Marshallese were never, ever told exactly what they were going through and why they were dying and why they were having all these treaties. Why were women giving birth to babies with no skeletons? Why was there so much cancer thyroid going on and people were dying of cancer thyroid? And people never knew that. Now this younger generation is learning it for the first time. And so when you hear spokespeople coming from the Marshall Islands, they're going to be people in their 20s. They're going to be young people who have finally been educated on what their past was. And so to me, it's a very, very dramatic story of what's going on.
I think it's so crucial what you said about their taking the companies to court, because if the companies weren't making money on this, they wouldn't be lobbying Congress and getting these bills through, and it wouldn't be happening. I think they are the key lever where we, the people, can actually cut this out. If the companies felt, okay, engaging in this work is going to be damaging to our corporate bottom line, they would be pulling out of the pushing this through. And the only reason these companies even exist, they're not consumer products. Nobody buys these things. It's because our tax dollars are used because they've rattled the fear, and we jump in and we say, oh yes, we've got to defend. And this happens not just in our country, but in other countries around the world. The other nuclear powers all do the same thing. Oh, the U.S. is building up, we have to build up. We're building up, they have to build up.
That's exactly what.
Talk a little bit more, and then I want to turn it open to questions for everybody else, but talk a little bit more about what you're showing here, the don't bank on the bomb, the ways we, the people, can actually enforce this treaty.
Right. Okay, well, first of all, and ICANN now has a cadre of international lawyers, and it's so fascinating to read what they are putting out. Just like they just put out a piece on how much money was spent during the COVID year 2020 by governments on nuclear weapons. And we can talk more about that in a bit, but this is another effort when people are asked, well, what can we do to help? Well, you can divest. Now you can divest as an individual. You can talk to your own financial advisor and say, I don't want any Boeing. I'm sorry. I don't want any Raytheon. I don't want anything from one of those companies that makes these weapons. I refuse to have any of my money in that. You can get your groups to do the same thing. So church groups or pension groups or any groups can divest, can look at their portfolios and divest. Code Pink and Don't Bank on the Bomb are two affiliated organizations that have identified not only the companies that produce the weapons, but they've identified the universities. There are something like 70 universities in the United States. Even though we only have 37 cities in the United States that have signed on to the treaty, there are 71 universities who are doing research that help somewhere along the line of nuclear weapons production. Well, is it your alma mater? You can find out, because Don't Bank on the Bomb actually has that information, and they're listing which schools have that. So you can write to your school and say, I would have supported you because I'm an alum, but no, not until you stop that research. So those city campaigns are the ones that I had explained, and then they have the securing pledges. Those are the individuals like the parliamentarians or the legislators. And we now have the 10 congresspersons and who have signed pledges that they support the treaty. So we're hoping that those kind, if you, and you can identify who they are, and then write them letters or get your own congressperson to sign on and see if you can talk them into making a pledge.
I think that's really key, how people can get involved. And I would like to see if anybody does have questions, please do raise your hands or put it in the chat. And in a little while, we'll be turning it over to Melanie to take questions. But particularly, I do want to ask you to say a little bit more about how not just divestment, but how can we, for instance, use tools like Boycott. There's an app that people can put in their phone where you could take all these companies and then take any consumer products made in relation to them. Like I believe Honeywell is one, but they also make thermostats and other things. So that when you scan products, okay, this is either by a company supplying those companies, because each one of those companies that are making these weapons, if you look at the language of that that you showed us in that wonderful slide, that you're not even allowed to aid, abet in any way, assist this creating of nuclear weapons. Well, if you're a supplier that's supplying the components that are being assembled into bombs by Boeing or by General Dynamics or whatever, because they all have to get their products from somewhere, then those people or people who are working there, what are some other ways that we could, and this Boycott app, by the way, you scan products to the store and it tells you, there's this boycott or that. I wonder if Code Pink and Don't Bank on the Bomb are also cooperating with that to put these companies and any that have consumer affiliates or tie-ins into an app like that, or maybe their own app where you could avoid.
I can tell you that that ICANN is working with they're going to have the meeting of all the countries that have ratified it. They're having it in January 22nd, the anniversary of the treaty coming into force. In 2022, they're going to have a meeting, and what they are doing right now with each of those countries is to say, okay, let's look at your own domestic situation, because now you have to implement all those provisions of the treaty as they apply to you. Okay, so you've got a Honeywell. Maybe Honeywell is selling you orange juice. All right, but Honeywell also produces gadgets, and the gadgets are very important for the nuclear weapons. They are telling those countries, now you can no longer do business with Honeywell.
And now Honeywell, of course, doesn't make orange juice, but they do make your thermostats and other things in your house. So if you are going to buy one of these products and you could know, okay, this company is violating international law. They're a lawbreaker. We're not going to buy that product. We're going to buy this other one from this company who's complying with international law.
That's coming.
That's something that is something that's coming that they'll be working on, right?
Well, I hope the Americans that are behind this, I hope that they would do that for us, because that really has to happen for each of the companies, for each of the countries that have signed and ratified the treaty. That's what they should be doing, boycotting all the products. And the government should be taking the lead in that. So they need cadres of people. They do have these 600 groups, but I think we need more ICANN groups in this country.
Right.
That are actually, looking at our market and seeing, so what else does Raytheon make? And are we buying anything from Raytheon? So what else does Northrop make that we might be buying? So we should be boycotting Northrop. I mean, we should be boycotting all of those.
Right. Well, that's a very good question. And who are the suppliers to those companies? Because some of these companies are just military companies. They only exist because they're getting our tax dollars, and it's a hog feed. They're just gobbling up the money and making these things mindlessly. But they do have to be buying their products from others, and many of them would have consumer connections. So that is one thing, as you're working on this, I'd love to see more of, because I think so many of us would get more involved if we had like an app right in our phone where we can be a part of doing this, and we're going to do an investment. Okay, well, we're not going to buy into this stock and this stock because it's tying in with that. Oh, we're going to buy this one. If that would pop up on our screen when we go to our investment sites, when it would pop up in there when we scan products, I think many of us would get more involved if there were a way to make it personal, that each person has a handle on complying with what is now international law.
Exactly. That's why we need people to know about this, because it is so exciting, but there are a lot of jobs left to be done. I looked at Biden's budget because I didn't know if you were going to ask me about that.
Oh, yes.
Inter-
Do tell us about the budget for
okay,
nuclear
this
weapons.
he put out the budget, and Fred Kaplan wrote a review of it on May 28th. So this is pretty current. There is $754 billion in the budget, 754 billion for military programs, including 715 for the Defense Department and 15.7 billion for nuclear weapons. But that shows up not in the Defense Department budget, but in the Department of Energy budget. They have scattered the weapons up and the whole military piece up into different parts. So it's very hard to understand how much money goes into supporting the military and all its activities and all the wars and all the veterans, because it's all in different pieces. So the nuclear weapons piece is specifically in the energy department. It has gone up this year, okay? And they predict, because they are now talking about trying to keep it at a 7% limit of the Department of Defense budget for nuclear weapons. Well, that means that it could go up to $50 billion on nuclear weapons within the next 10 years.
So that cap then doesn't affect putting it into other areas like Department of Energy and so on. So they can be much greater. So what percent of our of the spending is actually related to nuclear weapons?
Well, what percent? I don't know. I know that it's up to about 60% of the discretionary budget is for military.
Right.
Military, yeah, right. So that means everything from the supporting the 880 bases to the production and the maintenance of the nuclear weapons on those bases, et cetera.
Well, isn't one of the keys to this that as long as we assume that the way to get security is through military budgets and through fighting, that eventually it makes it very hard to let go of the nuclear weapons, because that becomes the ultimate deterrent for fighting all these other, in their minds, with these other weapons. But isn't the real key actually breaking out of the idea? Because as COVID shows, things don't stop at our national borders. All of these weapons of mass destruction, if employed, are employed against ourselves and against humanity as a whole. So the very idea that military force is the way to make you more secure, when we keep seeing over and over, it just makes more and more enemies and more hatred, and of course fires up all these other countries to do their own arms races. From, they all see this budget going up, they say ours have got to go up. Isn't the key actually to shift the very fundamental idea that war has anything to do with making us secure?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And and they're hoping too, when it comes to the businesses, they're hoping that if they do get these kind of boycotts on their products, or they're getting countries that say, wait a second, you can't do any business with us anymore because you were involved, not with us particularly, but your company is involved. Well, when those boards make decisions, and that's exactly what happened with the chemical weapons, they said it's not worth it to us. Because we're losing business because we are making these doggone chemical weapons. And that's why there was ethics on these boards, or good business sense. If you lose business, you don't want to keep doing what's losing business for you. So they gave up the chemical weapons. They're hoping that same pattern will replicate itself now.
Yes, and that also happened with the landmine treaty, that even countries that didn't sign it, the companies making it said, well, it's just not worth it. Honeywell was one of them. We're getting too much grief over this. They care about their stockholders and their bottom line. So that does give us a handle. Well, at that point, let's turn it over to questions, because I'm sure many of you have been very involved in this whole nuclear issue and may have some crucial questions or comments. Melanie?
Joanne, I just want to okay, you don't call yourself an expert, but I will, because you are, you're so informative. Everyone has been listening intently to every piece of information you've given, and there's a thumbs up right there from Tom. You are incredible. So your class is incredible. I took it with my father. She does it with 3 other colleagues, and they bring this all into focus. They educate you first, but they also go through the idea of how you feel about this issue, because a lot of times people are like, it's so scary. I don't know how to deal with it. So they deal with that. They bring that in. It's an incredible course. It's actually called Nuclear Weapons Nowadays, What You Can Know and Do. We have Richard. He's working in Rotary, this issue. Richard, did you have a couple of comments you'd like to say?
Yes, thank you very much, Melanie, and thank you very much, Arthur and Joanne. I'm a fellow Unitarian, so I share that with you, Joanne, as is Anne Frisch, who's also on this call. And Anne and I and Barbara are all Rotarians. And I've been working to try to get Rotary International to divest of their investments in General Dynamics. And hopefully this month they will be coming out with a policy on their investments. As you know, the climate crisis gets the news these days, and that was considered political, and Rotary does not get involved in politics. But a couple of years ago, it was considered or decided with our RI president, Ian Risley, that it was a humanitarian issue. And we're hoping that the same will apply also to nuclear weapons. And we're hoping that the government will, or that RI will divest of not only sort of fossil fuels, but also nuclear weapons. So would appreciate any more information you can give us on how we can take how companies are being taken to court. I'm very familiar with the ICANN, Don't Bank on the Bomb. I'm less familiar with Code Pink. So could appreciate more information on that as well.
I do have some information from a lawyer that was involved with a 2019 action. And so if you could contact me directly, I could forward that information on to you. That's as much information as I have, because she's been involved with several lawsuits. And I'd be happy to share with you. You could actually contact her directly if there's any more that are going on.
So now, if we would like to talk, Michael Walsh, he has a comment, some information he'd like to share. Michael, go right ahead.
A wonderful talk. I was totally blown away when I heard the number of nuclear weapons that had been tested. I thought it was maybe 1 or 2 or 4, maybe. That is extraordinarily bad and those to learn, but it's going to make me an activist in this area for sure. But I wanted to, this idea of, not supporting companies that are participants and contributors to nuclear weapons and so on. This is such a dynamic activist strategy. And I wanted to bring up Ellis Jones, who is a professor now at Holy Cross University in Massachusetts. And I had known him when he was at UC Davis in California. And Ellis Jones has, for years, produced the shopping guide, the Better World Shopping Guide, and the Better World Handbook. And they did a tremendous, along with many partners, a tremendous amount of research on products. Like, it ended up being something like 100,000 or 200,000 products, I believe, in which documented their supply chain and gave them a grade A, B, C, on how bad they were with their supply chain. Were they, bad for labor? Were they bad for, environmental problems, the production of the products, and things like that? And so that's what we'd like to incorporate into an eco store, where all that research has been done and give you advice on which product to buy. And so I thought you would benefit from knowing about Ellis Jones and the Better World Handbooks and how important that is, when you buy a product, that it really has an impact, whatever the supply chain might be.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Michael. Goodness sakes. And then we have a quick, little quick thing I want to read from Anne Frisch. Rotarians and friends of Rotarians, would you please consider, if you haven't done so already, to sign the Japanese Survivors Appeal? And then she put the link in the chat. It's rotarian.peaceinstitute.org. Just click and sign, really easy. And then Joseph, real quick comment.
While Johanna mentioned the legacy of the survivors in Japan and the Bikini Atolls, I lived in the Arctic for some time, and I would speak to some of the Eskimos. I don't know, maybe I should say Inupiat. And they said that their dentists would not have to use radiation to take x-rays of their teeth. That's what they told me. They were already that's what they said, I don't know. They were already radioactive because they ate the caribou, which ate the lichen, which was radioactive from the clouds, from the tests in New Mexico, and I believed Arizona. So what I'm saying, and of course, Joanne, you know this as much as I do, that it's much more global than we think it is. It's not only people that are in the islands of the atolls or the survivors of the Hiroshima bombings, but you know, everything just swirled up and landed in the Arctic. So it's a real serious issue. Well, I'm sure you know this already, but I'm just sharing my experience. Thank you for your
I think it might have been Russian testing that might have been going on, because I remember going to a Veterans for Peace program, and they had efforts to create the Arctic as a nuclear-free zone. And they were talking about the number of nuclear tests that had been conducted. And it could have been Chinese tests that were conducted in those areas. I'm not sure, because I heard of information about, I've included information that I found of the areas that where testing had occurred. And all the countries, I mean, I'm sure South Korea must have tested its weapons somewhere, maybe underground or somewhere else, but, and probably Israel as well. We don't know where. That could have been underground. But yeah, but when it comes to the Arctic, I know that has been a big issue, because there are efforts underway to try to see if they can make it a nuclear-free zone. So there must be people suffering from the effects of it there.
Oh my goodness. That is so heart-wrenching, and just showing us all, we're all in this together, and we need to stop this immediately. This is unacceptable. And with that note, I'd like to send it back to Arthur. Arthur, go ahead.
An incredible talk. Thank you so much for joining us. I love the way you've presented the treaty in such a clear way, and the clear role that we all can play in enforcing that treaty. And next week, we have some very special guests, same time, place. We have Greta Zaro, and David Swanson, who are with World Beyond War. And World Beyond War is one of the key groups who is making that last point we made, that, you know, yes, we got to get rid of nukes, but the way to do it is just to shift to a whole new alternative security system where we don't need the incredible waste that we're putting into military spending. You know, Eisenhower had said back in, way back in, I think it was, 1952 or so, he said, the best that could be, the worst that could come from this military-industrial complex is atomic war. The best would be a life of perpetual fear and tension, a burden of arms that defies the U.S. or any nation to provide true abundance and happiness for their people. And I do think that so many of the ills in the world are because we didn't heed that warning, nor the one of President Kennedy, who said the weapons of war must be abolished, or they'll abolish us. Fortunately, they haven't done it yet, but we've got to get on the ball, folks, and all do it. So I think the key to this is to follow up with Joanne by coming back next week to hear World Beyond War. And David has a crucial book showing that war is a lie. Every single war got started by false incidents and stuff, revving people up. People are whipped into war, but it's not the natural inclination of people to be at war. And actually, when you have direct exchanges, as Rotary does, between people across the planet, you find you love people everywhere, and there's no need for these wars. So we need to rise above these nations that have divided us and find a way to put an end to war before it puts an end to us. Joanne, if you want to finish with any final words, do you have a website they can go to? Or one that you especially recommend? What should people do?
Yes, I do. I do recommend. I am in love with ICANN, and the work that they are doing. There is so much on that website. You have to learn how to negotiate it. But if you can, for example, if you wanted to have a copy of the pledge, if you want to have a copy of something that you could present to your city council, they have all kinds of information on that on that. So that's ICANW.org. And I wholeheartedly recommend their the material that they have.
Well, they were very deserved recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize. So join us next week on the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.